Welcome back to the CIO Lifeline. Today's topic is reporting, strategies around it, all the data and possibilities with it. How do you organize it? What tools should you do? Should you do it yourself? Do you have the team to support it? And what does that lift look like? We have Linda Hart from Prince and Isant. With me, as always, is Craig Sroda. Don't go anywhere. Craig, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you, Tony?
I'm doing good. Today we have Linda Hart from Prince and Isant, based out of Cleveland, Ohio. Linda, thanks for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Of course, I'm doing well.
And what does Prince and Isant do? What business are they in?
We're in metal joining supplies. So we're a light manufacturer. So we deal with all sorts of end markets and everything from aerospace through medical, through transportation, through, HVAC. And we provide materials for joining two pieces of metal together. Because of a lot of the end markets that we're in and the metals that we're using, we deal a lot with precious metal, gold, silver, platinum, palladium, iridium, copper, aluminum.
You rattled off a bunch of materials. So is it? I guess how many products are offered? If I think of it in that sense, like how many line items?
Thousands. We have a lot of stock items, but generally because of a lot of the end markets that we're in, some of the items are specific to a customer. If you think about, aerospace, there are specific, if something on a plane needs to be repaired, the engineers go in and they have a very specific form that they need it, a very specific alloy, a very specific, everything has to be to spec because, people are getting on this thing and flying.
So I'm in a plane flying around the country. Chances are some material provided from your company is part of that.
I would be shocked if there wasn't.
If it wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do we have to sign an NDA here for this?
No. Record keeping is a big deal for us. So we keep, certifications, we keep paper. We joke that we make circles and paperwork because, we put things in airplanes and we put, things in people's bodies. We have a large medical division. So we keep paperwork for at least 20 years, if not longer. Data is very important to us. And holding on to that data for long periods of time and having that data be accessible to us at a moment's notice is a big deal.
And data is what brings us here today, right? And this is something that you have a pretty impressive past with, and that is organizing data, providing that data in visual form to your users. And maybe if you go back quite a few years, the visual form was less important than just, some kind of paper presentation or Excel-ish type of presentation. So the industry and how that's presented has come a long way. But give us a little origin story here, honing in on data. How did you know that was a passion of yours?
Growing up, my dad he's a bigger geek than I am, which is shocking, I know. But
Impossible.
Oh, bullshit.
I grew up with multiple computers in my house, and this was in the 80s. So we had Apple IIe, we had an Apple IIc, we had, I had at least, when people were still using typewriters, I had 3 computers. There was this thing called Microsoft Works at the time. Excel wasn't even a thing yet. And I would remember sitting in my dorm and playing with it, and there was Access, or the early stages of Access. And I started loading data into it. It was contact data. It was just information about, people that I knew. And I could turn this data any way I wanted to, and I could add data about the data, and I could spin it and show graphics and do all kinds. And I lost my mind. I thought this is the coolest thing that I have ever seen, and this is what I'm going to do.
All right, so you fast forward to today, and man, how times have changed.
No joke.
I think of just the volume of data that's out there. At least in my head, there's 2 schools of thought. There's DIY. You can craft something yourself, or you do a third-party tool. What are your thoughts on both? And is it team related? Is it capability related? You're a DIYer, right? That's how
I am.
But if for folks listening in or thinking about a strategy around reporting, what would be some advice on where to begin.
Yeah, I mean, it has a lot to do with where your skills lie, right? Mine, I've been in databases for, I don't want to say how long because that would just date me. But I am also a control freak, so I want to know exactly where my data is and exactly how it's laid out, and I want to understand backwards and forwards everything about this data. That's me. But I have built the skills over time to do that. If you don't have those skills in house, it's a whole lot harder, right? Because then you have to think about it. It's like you're going to need somebody who does understand those things. Because the biggest problem with data is getting an answer and having it be wrong. Right? That's my nightmare. That's what keeps me up at night. Getting an answer that they don't understand it's wrong and therefore basing decisions on incorrect information.
Yeah, and the technical side, of course, right, that you touched on. But Craig, you and I have talked about kind of the soft side because interpreting what the customer wants, in this case, our end users, our employees, is every bit as important, I think, as the data accuracy behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, it seems like you have to have a QC layer in now, even if you're a DIYer. I mean, with the mass amount of data that's out there. I started out on Paradox and Access and doing the same thing. So once I got hooked on that same way, and I'm pretty particular about the reporting and process because you're right, one wrong report and people don't trust it, and they go right back to manual checks and balances, and that's where adoption doesn't happen if they get one wrong answer. So, with the amount of reporting that we have at our fingertips now, with all the AI tools and everything, really, I'm seeing that you have to build in a QC team or QC layer that double checks this before it rolls out anymore.
Yeah, and I'm going to say nomenclature, like understanding what it is you're looking at. So, if my one of my sales managers walks in and says, "Hey, I want, customer sales for whatever region," I need to understand what that means because that means different things to different people. So we have to have sort of a common language in house so that we're always, when somebody says, "I want to see revenue," that definition of revenue is always the same.
So true. Like it's because it's an easy ask, right? I need to see sales for the EMEA region, or I need to understand profitability for the EMEA region. Whoa, okay. So what does that really mean? To your point, it means different things to different people. And what's the costing methods between regions? Well, they use standard, they use weighted average. I mean, all these things. It's like saying a sales team, well, we need CRM. Okay. What's your sales process? What's your definition of CRM? I mean, people use CRM as ERP systems. Like that is a wide net to cast. Narrowing it in, very important.
And one point too is we have to put our business hats on too, because if you ask for sales, is it include rebates, returns, credit memos, and if we just grab invoicing table, whatever, and somebody just does a correcting entry because it was in the receivables module for an overbill, that can swing sales or revenue numbers real big. So you got to think of counting now and ask the right questions from a process side of things.
And Linda, you own the data and the report, right? So you're the last mile.
Yes.
And if something's off, whether you
Yeah.
want to or not, they're pointing at you, right?
They absolutely are. And they're saying, "Hey, you said these numbers don't look right. Last month it was said this month it says this. Why are they different?" And then I spend, an hour or 2 hours going through at the invoice level or the credit memo or whatever, proving to them that the numbers are what I say they are. I drive them a little crazy, I think, because they'll come into me and say, "Hey, I need sales for whatever region." And then I immediately break into 100 questions. So, okay, do you want ship to information? Do you want sell to information? Are you interested in, profitability? Why are you asking the question? Oftentimes not really the question that they should ask me, right? So they're asking me, "I want sales for this." It's like, what are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? Because if you tell me what problem you're trying to solve, I can much better, create a report or a dashboard or a query or a pivot table or whatever to help you get to that answer. Because it's not just that first question. Like I can give you an answer to that first question. What are the sales numbers for this region? But the minute you have that, you're going to ask the second question and you're going to ask the third question because what you're trying to do is solve a problem. And if you tell me what the problem is, I can give you a more well-rounded data set to answer your question.
And doesn't this fuel the reason why collecting anything and everything you can. I mean, there's some guardrails there, but capturing data at the lowest possible level. Because when you start going down those conversation threads, you don't know what that next turn will be or what your creation will have to be, but you know you have the data there. And I also say that just because the cost of storage. Now, when we talk about cloud, and that's coming up, that even that changed the narrative a little bit. But generally speaking, do we want to collect anything we can collect at the lowest level? For example, invoice records, I'm not just not capturing the summary of the invoice it was for, every line item, every cost associated with it.
Yeah, I'm big into granularity because eventually somebody's going to say, I don't believe that number. Show me that that number's right. There are times I will collect data that nobody is asking for yet. So I do take snapshot data of quantity on hand for all of our inventory. And I've been doing it since I got here because I knew eventually somebody was going to ask me the trending of, how much we have on hand for any one alloy or any one, type of item. I knew it was coming. And that's just based on my experience because I was a BI consultant for so long. I know eventually somebody's going to ask that question. There's a fine line you have to walk. I mean, if you're convinced that this data is going to help you solve a problem eventually, then yeah, I would store it.
No, it's a good point. There is a fine line there, right? Because how many times did someone fob in to the facility? The number of cycles from your HVAC system. I mean, there's data everywhere. You're right. There is a fine line, but I think the guidance here is taking an educated guess or with your coworkers or colleagues at collecting data if it's there to capture just for that future use case. But yeah, you're right. There is some wasteful grabs that you want to be mindful of too.
One thing that stood out that you said, Linda, was I know this is a reporting discussion, but you're asking the questions, why do you want the data? I find that to be more common and useful now of, it's almost going back to the five whys. Why do you want this? Why do you want this? Why do you want this to get to the truth? And not only from a reporting standpoint, but we might uncover there's a process issue.
Yeah.
That we're not grabbing the right data, we're not grabbing the right unit of measure, we're not grabbing something could be off. So it's almost like we can't just take blanket requests anymore of, hey, I need this data. We have to really be asking the real questions and have that business analyst mindset now. And then you also uncover process issues that we need to be in this continuous improvement mode that we need to channel up and put on the to-do list also.
Let's talk about the cloud a little bit because another thing you mentioned, Linda, was cloud is cheap or cloud is cheap.
No.
Shit.
That was
Strike
nuts.
that from the record. That's a bullshit answer.
Oh, bullshit.
You mentioned on-prem storage is cheap, which I agree. Do you think that managing a reporting environment, I'll call it that, today is much easier than it was 15 years ago?
No, I do not. I, I think it's more difficult actually. There are more options. There are more tools. I mean, it's great. We have so many tools on my toolbox. I work in the Microsoft stack, right? So we use SQL Server. I use it on prem. I use Azure. I use all that, and that toolbox is so much larger than it used to be. I mean, I used to have if I knew SQL Server pretty well and I could admin a SQL Server database and I could get, use Excel, then I was golden, right? I could get data in and out and I could show people things and whatever. Today, I need to know almost 10 languages to do my job. I mean, it's great that we have this breadth of, tools to fit almost any situation. But as an IT provider, I have to understand what all those tools are and what they do and how it affects the architecture and the licensing and the price and the access for my users, whether they're here on prem or they're, out at, a customer.
It just doesn't fall under your traditional DBA job description, right? I mean,
No. Yeah.
we didn't specifically call us out, but it was part of your answer there with the data visualizations, the user experience. Do they need to access data from a customer? So are they doing it through an iPad or through their iPhone or Android device? The screen real estate is much different between the two. Is it going to efficiently present that information? What's the right approach there? And is it over cellular? Is it over Wi-Fi? Do you care? Do they have to VPN first? My God, this is a quite a comprehensive list and its complexity. So great answer there. When you talk about licensing, my head goes right to cloud. I think cloud is very expensive. So do you prefer cloud? Like in your perfect world, is everything in the cloud? Is it a hybrid of on-prem and cloud? How do you think about that?
I mean, it's a hybrid, and that's what I currently have because of the things we talked about before. I can put data in there, and I can move data around in vast quantities of data. I can keep it, I can move it without it really costing us any more. Right. So we've already paid for the license for the CPUs, and we have it here, and we have the space, and I can collect that data that nobody's going to use for 6 years, and I can collect that information. I can move things around, and that can all go there. And that's a really cheap way to do that. When I start putting things in the cloud, the minute I start doing that, like the clock is running, I'm not going to put anything up there that is not immediately useful.
Do you think that's a company size or SMB versus enterprise mindset? Because I see a lot of SMBs going total cloud.
Probably.
They don't want servers. They want, but they're not dealing with your type of data, your size of
Yeah.
data. So I think there might be a divide
Well,
in SMB to
it's
enterprise
it's it's
market.
absolutely. I mean, it's everybody's own, issues. What I'm dealing with, I need to have data present if somebody walks in and says, hey, there was a problem with this plane, you guys had parts in there, it was from 15 years ago, you need to give us the information for the parts you put on that plane. I have that at my fingertips on-prem. It's extremely dependent on your company, what they do, how much data they have, and what their staffing are.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on, I've been reading up on Microsoft Fabric and OneLake, how you can direct connect to like Oracle, SAP, and it's not an API, it's a call to the database. And it's not replicating, so in my mind I'm like, okay, that's cool, but if they have a problem on their side from a process standpoint and we're pulling data, we almost have to understand their whole process to make sure when we're pulling it in and integrating it in, nothing breaks over time, which is a whole nother QC verification step, right? I mean, it's cool, we could do it, but I'm like, oh, man, that comes with a whole nother stack of verification, validation, whatever you want to say, right?
I mean, that's actually one of the things I had, in mind, the whole data lake experience when we were talking about, making sure that you understand the data enough to get the right answer. Like I can pull data in from anywhere now. I can throw it in a data lake and hook it up and throw it out there. But do I understand what that data is when it's refreshed? What the interconnectedness is? Do I understand their process? No. Am I completely clear about what I'm looking at? Probably not, not in the way I am with my own data.
Yeah, and they just introduced OneLake, which is like OneDrive, right? So now these end users can connect up to other systems, and if they're getting information and making business decisions, I'm like, yeah, we want to push decision making down to the lowest responsible level, but we want to make sure it's accurate
Exactly.
too, right? So it's
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that one since they announced that. Also,
That's
it's
why
like, wow.
Microsoft's whole like citizen developer thing, they've been, on a kick for what, 6, 7 years at least now.
And it's another handful of SKUs. I mean, I think, cost control has to be part of the conversation. We also want to be mindful of protecting that data, guarding against, a ransomware or catastrophic failure on your end. So when you have 20 plus years of information and you have this hybrid model, what's your strategy on protecting that data, backing it up, et cetera?
The majority of the data we have in the cloud, and this is rapidly changing, but when we first started playing out there, everything we had out there was a copy of something we had in house. We were pushing it out there so we could use it with PowerApps or Power BI or some sort of cloud-based service. We were pushing it out there to use it. That is rapidly changing. We have all these DR procedures around everything we have in house. We have multiple backups. We go to multiple locations offsite in the cloud. We're in the process now because we've just sort of started having new data out there, and actually I'm going to say business critical data out there that we didn't have prior to this. It was just a copy of something we had in house. That is actually one of the things we're working on right now, evaluating DR procedures for the cloud. Like which data do we need to back up in that way, how we're going to do it, what we're going to use to build it, and what's our schedule.
Yeah, it's almost like we're going back to the RPO RTO model of when and how am I going to do that? How much time is it going to take? Because I had one friend that had a situation. They ended up paying the ransomware because they didn't think about how much time it was going to take to download the backup from the cloud. It was going to take weeks,
Oh,
and they
wow.
ended up, yeah, I mean, because it was that
Yeah.
big, and they didn't, you wouldn't have think bandwidth restore would be the issue, but it was the issue, so it's something we got to think about that too from a just a DR standpoint.
And then can you chunk that data back down to keep the business running? I mean, I think that's a consideration too. So instead of having to download a petabyte of data, I just need to get 2 terabytes to get the business running, and the balance of it we'll figure out. We can afford to have weeks of that recovery. It's a whole other mindset that goes into it because it's exciting to collect all this data and use it, but if you're down and it's business critical, like you mentioned, so how do you classify that data? How do you organize it? How do you back up? What is you mentioned your recovery point objective and an RTO, they all have to be part of that conversation. PowerApps, you mentioned, it has been a true useful tool for you to get a quick way to get information. Now, getting data that ERP is not collecting today or CRM is not collecting today, PowerApps, quick and easy, it allows you to get information. For your end users, is there a frustration like, okay, it's another interface, another endpoint I have to go to get this information, or are you embedding it into their core systems?
So we're embedding it inside of their teams, which is where they live most of their day anyway. And we try to, when we're designing the applications, be as consistent as possible. I mean, it's basic UI, stuff. Is like when you want to create a new record, you hit the plus sign. When you want to delete one, you hit the X. And just making it as consistent as possible across all these little apps.
I'm seeing that as the standard now. Everybody, Teams is like the central UI for all these little add-ins, and it's not cobbled. It's not like a big menu system, right, anymore. It's looks pretty integrated. Have you thought about the strategy with CoPilot on top of your Power Apps where it can ask language into your data and the new offline capabilities that they just
Yeah,
introduced is pretty powerful stuff. But the Copilot is, I'm getting that question quite a bit of, okay, yeah, I can naturally lay a extra tab window on my Power App so I can ask it
yeah.
questions. And are they going to ask the right questions? Is it going to give them the right data? All that stuff.
No, they won't
It's
ask.
report ad hoc reporting, right?
They won't ask the right questions, and it's what we talked about earlier, right? The sales guys are going to ask it, give me the sales for this region, and they're going to ask it the same way they would come and ask me, and I know to ask all the follow-up questions that the AI doesn't know to ask. So yeah, it's a little worrisome. It's very cool. But I am not currently adding an AI tab on it just for that reason, because I know what's going to happen. They're going to come in and ask, what are the sales here, and get an answer. And it's not going to be the same answer that they get from the cube. If they want to ask little questions about, if they collect a bunch of information at a trade show and they want to ask that information a question, yeah, great, do that. But
See, I do like that, right? So the ability for AI to create a market segment or something in the CRM space. But I heard you both mention, it's cool, which, another way to say it is it's a nice, it's kind of neat. We're not in the need to have yet. I'm sure I know there's use cases where you could argue it's a need to have. AI is a freight train. We're all going to have to embrace it. I like that Microsoft is building that into their stack. So they're kind of giving us those guardrails for us. But we have a policy out already around the use of these AI platforms, with a heavy emphasis on validation, because it's still using data that's out there, and to assume that it's all accurate is bad. And you get this comfort when you see a creation or output of something as AI based, it looks professional, it looks legit. All the more reason to make sure that you're validating this. So, Linda, thoughts on there's a data architect, data curator, and then you have analyst. Is it So where do we think? And the question for Craig too. I look at them as two very distinct roles, and one scenario is IT, if you want to call it an ownership. But I think in the case of architecture and curation, I do feel that does reside very much in the technical IT landscape. But then you have the analyst side and the creating of that of that front end. Do you see it as different companies have I'll call it power users within their function and they're creating they have that analyst hat on, or is it still kind of centralized, people come to you and field requests and you create something?
What I would love to see is each one of my departments having a business analyst, having someone who understands the data, is sort of the liaison between IT and that what I would call subject matter, right? So who understands the sales data at a level more so than the CSRs or the salespeople do. I'm not in the sales space, right? I organize the data, I make sure it's updated, I curate it, I make sure everything's working, but I don't go in every day and look at the sales data and look for trends myself. That is not what I do.
I love that. I do think I think it breaks down the barrier between IT just being a support function. Here's a request I need, throw it over the wall. You're integrated into the business. And I think it helps build those relationships with the different departments. You're architecting and you have the data there. They're getting in there and starting to really go through and QC it. And you just have these more engaged dialogues. All right. So in closing, Linda, a lot of great information you gave us today. If you were to summarize a few points, call it your top three when you think about strategy and the volume of data that's out there, what would be three takeaways for those thinking of expanding in this space and growing that out within their organization?
I think you have to look very critically and be very, very honest about, kind of where you are. How much data do I have? How much license fees can I afford? What does my staffing look like? You need to be real honest about where you are, and then you need to have a plan to get you where you think you need to be. Whether that's we talked about going completely cloud or going hybrid or staying on prem or whatever it is you want to do. Make sure that you understand where you're going, because if you don't, you're never going to get there. Two, the QA level that we've been talking about, that QA space, make sure that there is someone, whether it's an in-house person or somebody consultant you're bringing out from the outside or whatever, make sure that there is someone who understands the data well enough to QC it, to make sure that what you're looking at is what you think you're looking at. Make sure that if you're making new data, that you have a DR plan for that.
Okay, great conversation. Linda, thanks again for joining us. I learned a lot from you. Always do every time we get together. Craig, thank you as well. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Craig, I think you blue screened. Did you blue screen? Yes. Yes. We need an IT person to help. Do we have any? No, can't hear. We'll let the caffeine kick in. Well, so I have to jack the audio so I can hear Linda, but Craig, your audio is booming in. This will be fun in post. Because another thing you mentioned, Linda, was cloud is cheap. Shit. Strike that from the record. Yeah, I think it's a great point. And now I've lost my counterpoint question.
Sorry, man. Sorry.
Just,